My name is Elena, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the family shadow. The one everyone dismissed. The one no one listened to. The one who was part of the family but never important enough to matter. Tonight, I came back to change that. The annual family gathering was in full swing when I walked through the doors of the banquet hall. The tables were lined with silver trays, the air filled with laughter and clinking glasses. I hadn't been to one of these in years, but little had changed. My uncles stood in the centre, bragging loudly about their restaurant chain, as if they were kings of the world. I slipped into the room quietly, my black dress simple compared to their tailored suits. A few heads turned, and then came the smirks. "Well, look who decided to show up," Uncle Richard said, swirling his drink. "The stray sheep returns." Uncle Paul chuckled. "Surprised you could find the place. We thought you'd vanished for good." Their laughter spread to a few cousins. My cheeks burned, but I didn't flinch. I knew what they thought of me. Irrelevant, weak, someone who'd never achieved anything. And for years I let them think that. But tonight wasn't about letting them mock me. Tonight was about ending the silence. I walked closer, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," Richard muttered, earning another round of chuckles. "We're discussing business. You wouldn't understand." I glanced at the cousins gathered around, their heads nodding like loyal servants. I remembered all the times I had tried to offer ideas for the restaurants when I was younger, only to be laughed at, pushed aside, called a dreamer. Tonight they hadn't even bothered to ask me about my life. To them, I was still the forgotten niece. I straightened my shoulders. "Actually, I understand more than you think." Paul smirked. "Oh, did you finally get yourself a job at one of our restaurants? Washing dishes, maybe?" Laughter rang out again. My chest tightened, but I held my ground. "No," I said calmly, my voice carrying across the room. "I came tonight to tell you something important. Something that might change the way you look at me." The laughter slowed, replaced with raised eyebrows and amused smirks. "Go on then," Richard said, leaning on his glass. "Entertain us." I let the silence stretch for a moment. The weight of years pressed on me. Every insult. Every time I was told I wasn't enough. And then I dropped the words I had carried like fire. "I own your restaurants now." The room froze. The clinking glasses, the fake laughter, even the music from the speakers, all seemed to vanish into a stunned silence. Richard's face went pale. "What did you just say?" "I bought out the chain," I repeated, my voice steady. "The debts, the contracts, the name, it's all under me now." Gasps spread through the hall. Cousins exchanged shocked glances. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. Paul shook his head furiously. "You can't be serious. This is some kind of joke." I met his eyes, unblinking. "Do I look like I'm joking?" The silence that followed was heavier than any insult they had ever thrown at me. For the first time in my life, I watched their smirks crumble into fear. And then Paul slammed his drink down, his voice trembling. "You wouldn't dare." Long before that night in the banquet hall, I learned my place in the family. I was the daughter of the quiet sister, my mother, who worked long hours at a clinic while my uncles built their restaurant empire. Because she wasn't loud, because she didn't brag, because she wasn't successful in their eyes, she was treated like background noise, and by extension, so was I. At family gatherings, the spotlight always seemed to belong to my cousins. They were praised for everything. One cousin sang at church once and was treated like a star. Another joined the debate team and was paraded around as the future politician. Even if they did something small, like pass a test, it became a big celebration. Me? If I showed up with an award from school, my uncles would say, "That's nice," before turning back to talk about profits and menus. If I tried to join their conversations about business, they would chuckle and say, "Sweetheart, You stick to your books. It wasn't just about what they said, it was what they didn't say. When my grandfather drew up the inheritance plans, my name was barely mentioned. Richard and Paul were the future of the family. My cousins were assets. Me? My uncle once said I'd find a husband eventually, and that'll be her future. They said it right in front of me, as if I were invisible. I remember being 13, sitting in the living room while they laughed about plans to open another restaurant downtown. I had been sketching ideas for a menu design, something playful and fresh, and I worked up the courage to show them. Richard barely glanced at it. "Cute drawing," he said, tossing it back. "You should focus on making yourself useful. Help set the table." The others laughed. My cheeks burned so hot I wanted to disappear. After that, I stopped trying to share. I stayed quiet at gatherings, half listening to the endless chatter about business. When they spoke of family, it was clear I wasn't included in the picture. My mother noticed, of course. She'd squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "Don't let them get to you." But she couldn't stop them from treating me like a shadow. It only got worse as I grew older. At 18, I was left out of every serious conversation. While cousins were being trained to take over the empire, I was asked to fetch drinks or watch the little kids. It was clear I wasn't part of their future. The worst moment came one Thanksgiving. I was 19, back from my first semester at college. I had studied business management, secretly hoping that maybe, just maybe, if I showed them I had learnt something useful, they would take me seriously. During dinner, I shared an idea about cost-cutting measures and improving efficiency in their restaurants. I'd even prepared notes. Paul burst out laughing mid-bite. "What would you know about restaurants? You've never managed a thing in your life." Richard smirked. "College kids think they know everything." The whole table laughed. And I sat there, my notes trembling in my hands, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. After the meal, I overheard Richard telling Paul in the kitchen, "She's dead weight, irrelevant, best to keep her out of the business." That word stuck like a thorn in my chest. Irrelevant. From then on, I stopped expecting acceptance. Deep down, though, I carried a tiny spark, an ache to prove them wrong. If there was one thing my uncles loved more than their restaurants, it was their family dinners. Long tables, loud voices, endless boasting about profits and expansion. For everyone else, it was a chance to celebrate the success of the family. For me, it was a spotlight on my place at the very bottom. I was 21 when the worst of those dinners happened. I had been working part-time at a local bookstore while continuing my studies. Quiet, steady work. Nothing flashy, nothing anyone in my family valued. That night, the whole clan gathered in Richard's oversized dining room. Chandeliers glittered overhead, dishes steamed on the table, and my cousins paraded their latest accomplishments like prized medals. "Ethan just secured an internship with the state senator," Paul announced proudly, raising his glass. The table roared with approval. "And Olivia," Richard added, patting his daughter's shoulder, "has been accepted into a top culinary school. She'll be shaping menus in no time." Cheers erupted again. My mother clapped politely, smiling at everyone. I sat quietly, the weight of silence pressing on me. Finally, Richard's sharp eyes landed on me. "And you, Elena? Still, what was it? Folding books?" "It's a bookstore," I corrected softly. The room chuckled. Paul leaned back, smirking. "Don't take it personally. We just expect more from family. Real work, not hobbies." A flush spread across my cheeks. I wanted to disappear, but something in me snapped. I straightened in my chair. "It's not a hobby. I've been studying business. I actually had some ideas for the restaurants." The room quieted for a beat. My heart hammered. This was my chance, the moment I'd dreamed of. Maybe if I spoke clearly, they would finally listen. "I've been researching customer trends," I said, voice trembling but firm. "Your locations could save money and attract younger customers by updating the menus, adding delivery services, and even rebranding the interiors. If you... Laughter exploded before I could finish. Richard slapped the table. Rebranding? From the girl who sells novels at minimum wage? Paul shook his head, his grin wide. Delivery services? What's next, Elena? Are we supposed to turn the restaurants into drive-thrus? The cousins joined in, their laughter filling the room like smoke. My mother reached for my hand under the table, but I pulled it back, my face burning. Richard leaned closer, his voice dripping with mockery. Elena, let's be honest. You're not cut out for business. You never were. Leave the grown-up talk to us. Something inside me shattered. I sat frozen, my notes in my lap, my dreams crushed beneath their ridicule. I had offered them the best I had, the fruit of my hard work, and they had stomped on it like it was dirt. Dinner went on without me. More toasts, more laughter. My cousins clinked glasses while I stared at my untouched plate. Later, as I gathered my coat, I overheard my father speaking to Richard in the hallway. His voice was low, but clear enough to pierce me. She'll never amount to anything, he said. Better to keep her grounded before she embarrasses us. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might choke. My own father, the man who was supposed to protect me. I walked out of that house with tears stinging my eyes. In that moment, I knew I could never win their approval. No matter what I did, I would always be the outsider, the shadow. But something else stirred beneath the hurt. A whisper that one day I would prove them wrong. After that dinner, I stopped speaking at family gatherings. What was the point? Every word I said was turned into a joke. Every idea was dismissed. So I smiled politely, kept my head down, and carried the quiet weight no one wanted to notice. The irony was, even though they mocked me, I was the one patching holes they left behind. When Richard's youngest son needed new school supplies and the bills were too tight that month, my mother came to me. I pulled from my savings the little money I had from the bookstore and bought them everything. No one thanked me. The boy showed off his shiny backpack at the next gathering, and Richard bragged about how he always made sure his kids had the best. When Paul's restaurant faced a late utility bill, I covered it. I worked extra shifts, scraping together what I could, and quietly paid it off through my mother. At the next dinner, Paul boasted about how he always kept the lights on with his sharp financial skills. And when my father's car broke down, I used the money I'd been saving for a certification course and handed it over to help. He didn't mention it again. He only muttered once about how Elena should learn responsibility. I gave and gave until I had nothing left for myself. Only one person saw the truth. My cousin Daniel. Not Paul's son, but my mother's nephew from her side. He was the quiet kind, often left out like me. He worked at a small repair shop and never got the spotlight either. One evening, I sat with him in the corner of a family barbecue, watching Richard and Paul argue about who deserved more credit for the chain's success. Daniel leaned toward me and whispered, "I know what you did with the utility bill." I froze. "How?" He shrugged. "I overheard my dad talking. They'll never admit it, but I know it was you. You always step in when they can't handle things." For a moment, my chest ached. Someone had finally noticed. "Why don't you say something?" I whispered. "Because they'd twist it," he said simply. "But I see you, Elena. Don't forget that." His words stayed with me. In a sea of cruelty, it was the first time someone had given me acknowledgement. Still, the sacrifices continued. I worked late shifts, skipped classes, and gave up opportunities. My life shrank to the shadows while theirs expanded. Every time I thought of saying no, guilt crushed me. My family always made me feel like it was my duty. "You're part of this family," my father would say. "We all sacrifice." But we never meant all of us. It meant me. By the time I was 23, my savings were gone, my dreams on pause. My cousins graduated into prestigious jobs and internships, while I barely scraped by, exhausted. Then one night after closing the bookstore, I saw a newspaper headline: "Local restaurant chain facing heavy debt." My stomach dropped. It was Richard and Paul's chain. Their empire, the pride they flaunted at every meal, was crumbling. I read every word under the yellow street light. Bad management, poor expansion choices, mounting loans. The very empire they mocked me for not being part of was collapsing under their own hands. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt the first spark of something else. Possibility. The article about the restaurants haunted me for days. I kept the paper folded in my bag, pulling it out during breaks at the bookstore, reading the same lines over and over. Mounting debt, poor leadership, uncertain future. It almost felt like justice. The very men who mocked me, who told me I'd never understand business, were sinking under their own arrogance. But instead of satisfaction, I felt a deep ache. Because even now, even after years of insults, a part of me wanted to help. I told myself I would try once more. That Sunday, I joined the family dinner. The air was heavy with tension. My uncles looked thinner, their laughter forced. I waited until plates were cleared and silence fell. "I read about the restaurants," I said carefully. "If you want, I could help. I've been studying business management. I've learned about restructuring and—" Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Not this again," Paul sneered. "We don't need advice from someone who couldn't even finish her own degree." "I didn't finish because I worked to pay your bills," I snapped before I could stop myself. My voice shook, but the words were out. The room went silent. My cousins glanced at each other, eyes wide. My father's voice cut through, cold as stone. "Enough, Elena. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked around the table. The people I had sacrificed for, bled for, bent over backwards for, every single one stared at me with contempt. My chest tightened. For years, I believed if I just gave enough, they would finally see me. But here was the truth, plain and raw. They never would. That night I cried harder than I ever had before. Not because of their cruelty, I had grown used to that, but because I finally understood there was nothing I could do to change it. I would never be accepted, not as their equal, not even as their family. Leaning against my bed, my cheeks wet with tears, I made a decision. If they would never see me as worthy, then I would stop living for their approval. The next morning, I applied for a position at a financial firm 2 towns over. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and it was mine. I packed my things and left without telling anyone. At first, it was hard. I rented a small apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet. I stretched meals, counted every penny, and worked long hours. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't bleeding myself dry for them. I was building something for me. Months passed. I learned quickly, absorbing everything I could about budgets, loans, and investment strategies. I stayed late at the office, asked questions no one else wanted to, and slowly I earned respect. My boss noticed my persistence and gave me more responsibility. Still, late at night, I thought about my family, about how easily they had discarded me, about how much I had given only to be treated like nothing. The pain never fully went away, but it hardened into something sharper: resolve. I stopped waiting for their approval. I stopped wishing for their love. And deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "One day, Elena, they'll regret every word they said." Life outside my family's shadow was small at first, but it was mine. The apartment was nothing fancy, Just 2 rooms, a squeaky radiator, and windows that rattled when trucks passed on the street. But every time I turned the key, I felt a rush of pride. It wasn't given to me by anyone. I had earned it. At the financial firm, I started as an assistant, handling spreadsheets and coffee runs. But I watched carefully, listened to everything, and learned faster than anyone expected. Soon, I was reviewing loan applications, spotting errors others missed. My manager, Ms. Kelly, began to trust me with more responsibility. "You have an eye for numbers," she told me once, sliding a stack of files across my desk. "Use it." I worked long hours, sometimes falling asleep at my desk with papers spread around me. It was exhausting, but it felt different from the exhaustion I carried at home. This time, every drop of effort was building towards something that belonged to me. On weekends, I read business books and case studies. I started paying attention to restaurant management reports, studying what worked and what didn't. I told myself it was curiosity, but deep down I knew why. Part of me was still watching the empire my uncles flaunted. Years passed quietly. I didn't visit family gatherings. I avoided their calls, which came less and less often anyway. When they needed money or help, they turned to others. I was free of their demands and free to grow. One evening, as I left the office, I passed a newsstand. My eyes caught a headline: "Local restaurant chain struggles to stay afloat amid debt crisis." My chest tightened. It was them. Richard and Paul's empire, crumbling again. I bought the paper and read it on the subway. The article was brutal. Failed expansions, unpaid loans, declining customers. They had tried to compete with newer franchises but couldn't keep up. The very chain they mocked me for not being part of was becoming a sinking ship. I folded the paper and stared at the city lights through the window. For years they told me I was irrelevant, but here was proof of their weakness. Not from me, but from the world itself. That night I called Daniel, the cousin who once noticed my sacrifices. He still worked at the repair shop, still the quiet one in the family. "I read about the restaurants," I told him. He sighed. "It's bad. They won't admit it, but everyone knows they're drowning. They still brag at gatherings, but the truth is out." "Do they know I left?" I asked. "They don't talk about you," he said softly. "But I remember what you did. I remember the bills you paid. They act like you never mattered, but I know better." For a long moment I said nothing. The subway rattled around me, but inside I felt still. Daniel's voice grew cautious. "Why do you ask?" I stared at the folded newspaper in my lap, because deep inside I felt the spark again, the one that whispered I wasn't finished with them yet. "I just needed to know," I said quietly. "That's all." But it wasn't all. The truth was, I had spent years building skills, saving money, learning about finance. And now the empire that once excluded me was vulnerable. The question pressed against me like a secret I wasn't ready to say out loud. What if I didn't just watch them fall? What if I stepped in? A week after Daniel and I spoke, I couldn't shake the thought. The restaurants had always been their pride, their throne. For them to lose it meant losing their power. One afternoon at work, I stayed late combing through financial bulletins. Buried in the notices was something that made my heart skip. Chain of family-owned restaurants enters negotiations for debt resolution. Potential buyers sought. I reread the line 3 times. My uncles weren't just struggling. They were looking for a way out. They were willing to sell. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paper. My mind spun. For years, they mocked me for not being part of their empire. And now, the empire was slipping from their hands. At first, I told myself I was just curious, but curiosity turned into research. I tracked down public filings, read through debt reports, and even studied their contracts with suppliers. Every line told the same story. They were desperate. And for the first time, I realised I wasn't. I wasn't rich, but I had something they didn't. Knowledge, discipline, and the will to build. Over the years, I had saved carefully, investing in small funds, cutting corners, living simply. With the right partners, I could raise more. The thought terrified me. Me, the forgotten daughter, the family shadow, owning their empire. It sounded impossible. That night, I called Daniel again. My voice shook as I told him. The restaurants are going up for sale. He was silent for a moment. Then he whispered, "You're not thinking of buying them, are you?" I laughed nervously. I couldn't. Couldn't or won't, he pressed. I hesitated. The truth was I could. Not alone, but with the right investors, I could pull it off. And if I did, it would mean the one thing my uncles never believed possible, that I had power they couldn't take away. Daniel's voice softened. "Elena, if anyone deserves it, it's you. You gave them everything, and they gave you nothing. This would be justice." The words struck me. Justice. Not revenge, not cruelty. Justice. The next weeks blurred into motion. I spoke with Ms. Kelly, my manager, who connected me with a group of investors interested in struggling but salvageable businesses. I presented my research, my plan to restructure, modernise and rebuild the chain. To my shock, they listened. They didn't laugh. They nodded. By the end of the month, I had something I never imagined possible. Backing. Enough to make an offer. I sat alone in my apartment the night before signing, the contract on the table, my pen trembling in my hand. I thought of all the years I had been mocked, ignored, treated as irrelevant. I thought of my mother's tired face, of Daniel's quiet loyalty, of the countless nights I went without so others could shine. I thought of my uncles laughing at me across glittering tables. And then I signed. Just like that, their empire became mine. But I didn't tell them. Not yet. The invitation to the annual family gathering arrived the next week. A thick envelope with my name on it, written as if I was still part of their circle. For the first time in years, I smiled as I held it, because this time I wasn't coming as the forgotten daughter. I was coming as the owner of everything they thought I'd never touch. The ink was barely dry on the contract when I knew I couldn't carry this secret alone. There was only one person I trusted enough to tell. Daniel. I asked him to meet me at a quiet cafe far from the neighbourhoods where our family might spot us. He arrived in his work uniform, grease still on his hands, and sat across from me with curious eyes. "You sounded serious on the phone," he said. I slid the folder across the table. "Open it." He flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing. And then his eyes widened. "Elena, this is a purchase agreement." I nodded. I bought the chain. All of it. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he laughed softly, not mocking, but stunned. "You actually did it. You own their empire." The words felt surreal even as he said them. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, grounding myself. They always told me I was irrelevant. Now, every building, every menu, every contract has my name on it. Daniel leaned back, shaking his head. "If Uncle Richard and Uncle Paul find out before you're ready, they'll lose their minds." "I don't plan to tell them yet," I said. "Not until the gathering." He frowned. "Are you sure? That's dangerous. They're proud men, Elena. They'll twist it, try to take credit, or worse, try to drag you down again." I met his eyes. "That's why I need to be the one to reveal it, in front of everyone, so they can't spin it, so they're forced to face the truth." He studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You've always deserved this. Just promise me one thing. Don't let their cruelty turn you into them. This should be your justice, not their mirror. His words struck me deeply. Justice, not revenge. I had to remember that. Over the next few days, I prepared myself. I reviewed the contracts, memorised the numbers, made sure every document was airtight. If they tried to challenge me, I would be ready. At night, I lay awake, memories flooding back. Nights I skipped meals to cover their bills, birthdays where I was forgotten. The sound of my father's voice calling me an embarrassment. Each memory stung, but instead of weakening me, they steeled my resolve. When the invitation to the gathering sat on my table, I stared at it for a long time. In the past, it had always felt like a reminder of where I didn't belong. This time, it felt like a stage. Daniel checked on me the evening before. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're human. Just don't forget, you're not the shadow anymore. You're the storm." The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my simple black dress. No glitter, no show. I didn't need to pretend to be something I wasn't. The power was already mine. I slipped the signed documents into my bag, my heart steady. This was it, the moment years in the making. As I locked my apartment door and stepped into the cool air, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. For the first time, they would see me. The banquet hall smelled of roasted meats and polished wood. Laughter echoed from the tables where my family had already gathered, glasses raised in celebration of themselves. I paused at the doorway, the invitation in my hand, my bag heavy with the documents tucked inside. My heart thudded. But I reminded myself, this was not their stage anymore. It was mine. "Look who finally decided to crawl back," Uncle Richard said the moment he saw me. His booming voice carried across the room. "Elena, the prodigal ghost." Cousins snickered. My father gave me the same tired look he always had, the one that said, "Why bother?" Uncle Paul leaned forward with a grin. "We almost forgot you existed. What have you been doing? Reading books in some dark corner?" Laughter spread around the table. It was the same script, the same performance I had endured for years. I slipped into a seat quietly, letting them believe I was still the shadow. Dinner began, course after course served by waiters in crisp uniforms. My family's voices rose with every toast. Richard bragged about how their restaurants were weathering challenges. Paul chimed in, claiming they had strategies to turn everything around. I bit back a smile. If only they knew. A cousin asked, "So, Elena, what's your contribution tonight? Or are you here to just listen like always?" The table chuckled. My mother glanced at me with pity, but said nothing. I set my fork down slowly. I came to listen and to observe. Richard smirked. "Observe? Don't strain yourself." Their laughter stung, but less than it once had, because I knew what they didn't, that their empire no longer belonged to them. As dessert was served, Richard rose, glass in hand. "To family, to building legacies, and to leaving behind the weak links that hold us back." His eyes flicked toward me as the table erupted in cheers. Something in me hardened. This was the same man who once called me irrelevant, who laughed at my ideas, who dismissed every effort I ever made, and here he was again, parading his arrogance. I let the cheers die down before I spoke. "Weak links, Uncle?" I asked softly. He smirked. "Don't take it personally. Some of us were made to lead, others to follow," Paul chuckled, "or sit quietly at the kiddie table." The laughter spread like poison, echoing in my ears. My fingers brushed against the folder in my bag. Not yet. Not until the moment was right. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice calm. You're very confident considering the state of your restaurants. The laughter faltered. Richard's smile stiffened. What do you know about that? Paul scoffed. We're handling it. Don't concern yourself with things beyond your reach. I studied them for a long moment, their smug faces hiding the panic I knew was underneath. The documents in my bag seemed to pulse, waiting to be revealed. Then Richard leaned closer, his voice dripping with scorn. You'll never sit at this table as an equal, Elena. Not in this lifetime. My chest tightened. The words were sharp, but instead of cutting me down, they fueled me. Because I knew something he didn't. I already had. I straightened my back, my voice steady. Are you sure about that? The table fell quiet, confusion flashing across their faces. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't playing their part. I was playing mine. The silence at the table hung heavy after Richard's words. His smug grin, the cousin's half-suppressed laughter, my father's disapproving sigh. It was a scene I knew by heart. Only this time, I wasn't the same Elena they remembered. I reached into my bag slowly, my hand brushing against the folder of contracts. My heart pounded, but my voice came steady. You say I'll never sit at this table as an equal. But what if I told you I already do? A few cousins exchanged puzzled glances. Richard frowned. What nonsense are you talking about? I pulled the folder free and laid it on the table. The thick papers slid across the linen, landing between the platters of untouched dessert. Read for yourself. Paul chuckled nervously. What is this, homework? Not homework, I said evenly. Ownership. Richard snatched the top page, scanning it quickly. His smirk faded, his face paling as his eyes darted over the signatures. This is a purchase agreement. I leaned forward. Correct. Your purchase agreement. As of last month, every restaurant you brag about belongs to me. The table gasped. Forks clattered against plates. Cousins whispered, their voices a rush of disbelief. Paul yanked the papers from Richard's hand, flipping through them with shaking fingers. No, this can't be right. He jabbed a finger at me. You don't have the money. You don't have the connections. This is forged. Check the signatures, I said calmly. Check the dates. Check the creditors who signed off. Everything is legal. Everything is final. Another added, does that mean she controls everything now? Paul's hands shook as he shoved the papers back across the table. This isn't over. You think this makes you better than us? You're still nothing without this family. I pushed the folder back toward him, my voice cold. Funny, because this family was nothing without me. You just didn't realise it. For once, they had no laughter, no quick insults, no mocking comebacks. Just silence and the pale faces of men who had finally been caught powerless. I looked around the table, at the uncles who mocked me, the cousins who followed their lead, the father who never believed in me. My chest didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt free. But before I could say another word, Richard slammed his fist against the table, rattling the glasses. His face twisted with fury. If you think you can take this from us, Elena, you're making a mistake you'll regret. The table rattled from Richard's fist, glasses tipping, silverware clinking. His face was red, his voice shaking with fury. This isn't real. It can't be. It's real, I said evenly. You signed the debts away. You let your empire rot, until it was ripe for the taking. And I took it. Paul grabbed the papers again, flipping through every page as if he could undo the ink with sheer will. His hands trembled. Where did you even get the money? You can't have done this on your own. I leaned back, calm. I learned how to manage what you never could. While you mocked me, I was building. I partnered with people who believed in results, not family names. Cousins whispered furiously among themselves. One asked, "So she's in charge now? Completely?" Another muttered, "Does that mean we work for her?" The questions spread like sparks. Richard's jaw tightened. "You'd throw away your blood for this?" I almost laughed. Blood? You only remembered me when you needed a scapegoat, when you needed bills paid, when you needed silence. Blood didn't matter then, did it? Paul slammed the papers down, his voice cracking. "You can't do this to us, Elena. We built this family name. You'll ruin it." I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. My voice carried across the room, steady and sharp. "You ruined it yourselves. I just picked up the pieces." For the first time, my father spoke. His tone wasn't angry, but pleading. "Elena, don't let bitterness blind you. We're still your family. You wouldn't destroy us." The words cut deeper than Richard's fury or Paul's denial, because once I might have believed them. Once I might have sacrificed myself again, hoping for approval that never came. But not anymore. "I'm not destroying anything," I said firmly. "I saved the business from collapse. If I hadn't, it would already be gone." Richard pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're lying. You want us to beg. That's what this is. Beg." The irony nearly made me laugh. For years it was me begging, for recognition, for kindness, for a place at the table. Now the roles were reversed. One cousin, Olivia, leaned forward. "Elena, if this is true, please think carefully. The restaurants mean everything to us. You can't just—" I cut her off. "Everything to you? They meant nothing to me when I offered help and was laughed at. They meant nothing when I paid your debts in silence. You made it clear I didn't belong, but now, suddenly, I matter?" The silence was sharp. Faces turned pale, voices died in throats. Richard tried again, his tone shifting from rage to desperation. "We can work together. You've made your point. Just give us back control and we'll acknowledge you this time." Paul nodded quickly, his voice unsteady. "Yes, we'll make room for you. You'll sit at the table. Just don't do this." Their sudden shift was almost pathetic. Years of scorn washed away in minutes, replaced by panic. I folded the papers neatly, sliding them back into my bag. Funny how quickly your tune changes when the power isn't yours. Their eyes followed me, wide and desperate. For once, they weren't mocking me. They weren't laughing. They were scrambling. And it was only the beginning. The night after the gathering, I thought I'd finally get peace, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails and texts piled up, each one from my uncles, cousins, even my father. By morning, Richard himself was waiting outside my apartment building in his shiny car. The same man who once laughed at me for folding books now jumped to open the passenger door. "Elena," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Let's talk." I hesitated, but curiosity won. I slid into the seat, the leather cold beneath me. "You've made your point," he began quickly. "You're not irrelevant. You're not invisible. You proved us wrong, and I'll admit it, I underestimated you. We all did." I studied his face. The lines around his eyes weren't pride anymore. They were fear. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. He forced a laugh. "What I've always wanted. Family unity. We can move forward together. You own the restaurants, yes, but let us keep running them. We'll give you credit. We'll even give you dividends." Dividends. As if scraps from their table could erase decades of scorn. "I'll think about it," I lied. His smile brightened instantly. "That's all I ask." But the begging didn't stop with him. Later that day, Paul showed up at my office, hat in hand, literally, as though humility could fit him. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling, "you know the restaurants are our legacy. If they slip from us, we'll have nothing. Please, don't sell. Don't let strangers ruin what we built." I almost laughed. "What you built?" "They built their empire on arrogance and left me in the shadows." "You mean what I saved," I corrected. His lips tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, what you saved. Just let us keep it in the family." Family. That word cut deeper than any insult. Where was family when I was paying their bills in silence? Where was family when they called me irrelevant? That night, I sat with Daniel at the cafe, my hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea. "They're begging now," I told him. "Richard wants dividends. Paul talks about legacy. They've flipped so fast, it makes my head spin." Daniel leaned forward. "And how does it make you feel?" I stared at the steam rising from my cup. Part of me feels satisfied, but part of me feels tired. I don't know if I want to keep this chain at all. I could sell it, walk away, and never hear their voices again. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's your choice, not theirs. Not payback, not revenge. Your choice." His words settled over me like a truth I hadn't wanted to face. I had the power, yes. But what did I want to do with it? The next family dinner came quicker than expected. This time, no one mocked me. No one laughed. They hovered, cautious, their voices syrupy with forced kindness. Cousins complimented my dress. Uncles pulled out chairs for me. My father even poured my drink. It was absurd. When the table quieted, Richard cleared his throat. "Elena, we've been thinking. You should stay in charge, of course, but keep it in the family. Don't sell. We'll work with you. We'll respect you. Just don't cut us out." Every face at the table turned to me, waiting, desperate. I set my glass down slowly, letting the silence stretch. Then I said the words that made the room freeze. "I'm considering selling." The words hung in the air like a blade. I'm considering selling. For a moment, no one moved. Forks hovered midair, glasses half raised. Then the panic began. "You can't," Richard blurted, his face paling. "Elena, think of what this will do to us, to our name." Paul leaned forward, his voice trembling. "If outsiders get their hands on the restaurants, we'll lose everything. Our reputation, our legacy, it'll all vanish." I stayed silent, sipping from my glass as though I hadn't just shaken their world. Cousins began to murmur, their voices rising in frantic chorus. Olivia spoke first. "Elena, please don't sell. I've always admired your strength." I nearly laughed. She had spent years ignoring me. Another cousin chimed in. "Yes, you've proven yourself, but selling? That's extreme." Richard's voice cracked as he tried to steady it. "We'll make it worth your while. Bigger shares, special privileges. You'll get everything you ever wanted. Just don't sell." everything I ever wanted? No. What I wanted was never money or shares. What I wanted was respect. I folded my hands on the table. Funny how I was irrelevant yesterday. Now suddenly I'm the most important person in the room. The silence that followed was sharp. No one laughed this time. Paul's tone shifted, syrupy and false. You're right. We were wrong. We should have seen your potential sooner. But we can change. We can be better. If you let us stay involved, we'll honour you properly. I tilted my head. And if I don't? Richard's eyes darkened. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. If you sell, Elena, you'll regret it. Outsiders won't protect you the way family can. They'll use you and toss you aside. You'll end up alone. There it was, the shift from begging to threatening. The old familiar cruelty wrapped in fear. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I've been alone before, I said calmly. It's not the worst thing. What's worse is being surrounded by people who pretend to be family while tearing you down. Richard's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Across the table, Daniel finally spoke. She doesn't owe you anything. His quiet voice cut through the room like steel. She carried you for years and you spat on her for it. If she wants to sell, that's her right. All eyes turned to him. Paul's face twisted. You stay out of this. You're barely part of this family yourself. Daniel met his gaze evenly. Then maybe that's why I can see things clearly. For once, someone had stood with me at the table. And it wasn't out of desperation. It was out of truth. I pushed my chair back and stood. I haven't decided yet, but you'll know soon enough. Until then, don't call me irrelevant again. The room stayed frozen as I walked away, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Every step was heavier with the weight of their panic, and lighter with the freedom of my choice. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I thought of Daniel's words. She doesn't owe you anything. For the first time in my life, I believed them. But as I drifted to sleep, I couldn't shake Richard's threat. If you sell, you'll regret it. Richard's threat echoed in my mind for days, but the world moved faster than his words. 2 weeks after the gathering, headlines began to spread. Restaurant chain under new ownership after years of mismanagement. Articles dissected the company's decline in brutal detail. Failed expansions, unpaid debts, lawsuits quietly settled. The journalists dug deep, unearthing every crack Richard and Paul had tried to plaster over with false pride. Their names were suddenly everywhere, not as successful businessmen, but as cautionary tales. At the bookstore near my office, I overheard 2 customers flipping through the paper. Those brothers thought they were untouchable, one said. Turns out they ran their business into the ground. I walked past quietly, my heart steady. They didn't know it was me who now held the reins. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt seen, even if the world didn't know my name yet. At home, my phone buzzed constantly. Calls from unknown numbers, messages from journalists, emails from suppliers desperate to know who was in charge now. I handled them one by one, calmly, professionally. I wasn't the timid girl begging for approval anymore. I was the decision maker. But my uncles weren't calm. Richard showed up at my apartment late one night. His suit was rumpled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. When I opened the door, he fell to his knees right there in the hallway. "Elena," he rasped, "please, don't sell. Don't cut us out completely." The sight would have shocked me years ago. Richard, the man who once called me irrelevant, kneeling like a beggar. Now it only filled me with a quiet, bittersweet ache. "You laughed at me," I said softly. "You told me I'd never be your equal." He lowered his head. I was wrong. We were wrong. We need you. Need. That word they had never once attached to me before. I shook my head. You don't need me. You need control. And you'll never have it again. I closed the door before he could answer. His muffled sobs lingered in the hallway long after. The next day, Paul tried his approach. He sent a long, dramatic email filled with apologies, promising partnership, swearing he had always believed in me deep down. It was almost laughable. Daniel visited me that evening, catching me staring at the email on my laptop. "Are you tempted?" he asked gently. "No," I said. "Not tempted, just amazed at how quickly they've changed their tune." Daniel leaned against the counter. "Fear makes men crawl, but remember, they don't respect you. They fear losing everything. That's not the same." He was right. Their sudden kindness wasn't love or respect. It was desperation. And I wouldn't let it chain me again. As the weeks passed, the story only grew. Richard and Paul avoided the press, their reputations crumbling. Investors refused their calls, suppliers turned to me. Slowly, the family name detached from theirs and attached to mine. But with every headline, with every whisper of their downfall, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. This wasn't just revenge. It was the end of something I had once longed to belong to. One evening, as I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker, I knew the final decision was coming. Would I keep the restaurants and rebuild them as my own? Or would I sell, severing the last tie to the family that had cast me aside? The decision weighed on me like a stone. Every night I stared at the documents spread across my kitchen table. Offers from buyers, projections for the future, letters from my uncles begging for second chances. It all came down to one question. Did I want to hold on to the empire I had wrestled from their hands? Or was it better to let it go? Daniel sat across from me one evening, arms folded, watching me pace the small apartment. "So," he asked gently, "what do you want, Elena? Not what they want, not what the world expects. You." I froze. No one had ever asked me that before. What did I want? I wanted peace. I wanted freedom. I wanted to live a life where my worth wasn't measured by what I gave away or what others stole from me. The answer came clearer than I expected. The next week, I called a press conference. The room filled with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. I stood at the podium, my simple black blazer no match for the frenzy in front of me. "Months ago," I began, "I acquired the restaurant chain long tied to my family's name. At the time, it was drowning in debt. I saved it. I rebuilt it. And now, I've made a decision about its future." The crowd leaned in. "I will be selling the chain to a group that can take it forward. It will no longer be tied to the family that once ran it. Its story starts fresh today." Gasps filled the room. Questions flew, but I raised my hand. This choice isn't about revenge. It's about release. For too long, I lived in the shadows of a family that didn't see me. Now, I choose to step into my own light. The cameras flashed like lightning. That night, my phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from Richard, Paul, even my father. Voicemails filled with anger, disbelief, and eventually sobs. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on my balcony with Daniel, watching the city stretch endlessly before us. "You really did it," he said softly. "I did," I replied. "Do you feel lighter?" I thought about it. For years, I had carried their insults, their dismissals, their mockery. I had carried the weight of being invisible. And now, it was gone.